Hey, you guys, Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you. I'm going to be talking about the full moon we have coming up just around the corner here. This is taking place on Monday, November 27th. It peaks at 1:16 a.m. Pacific time. And this takes place in the sign of Gemini, 4 degrees Gemini. Now, first of all, I do apologize for giving you guys such short notice for this full moon update. I've got a lot going on over here. I'm going to be moving very soon. This may be the last video you see me making from this room. There might be one more. I technically don't move out until December 15th, but there's been a lot of activity going on in my life. So again, I apologize for giving you guys such short notice. And on that note, sometimes this happens in my life. And if you haven't already done this, if you click the little bell, if you don't know what I'm talking about, look for a little bell icon that's usually, I think it's like right below the video on YouTube. If you click that, then YouTube will notify you. I think it's like pretty instant when I upload something, so that you don't, you're not seeing these videos 4 or 5 days after the full moon or new moon or whatever it is. Okay, so there's that. Now, what I'm going to do in this recording is we're going to be talking about how to work with this energy. Basically, it's like when we have a full moon, it is the peak of a growth cycle. Okay, a growth cycle that began approximately 6 months ago when we had a new moon in the sign of Gemini. Over these 6 months, we've all been experiencing an opportunity for growth that is related to this sign of Gemini. Okay, this is the peak of that growth cycle, and this is a time to honor that growth. And this is also a time, as soon as this moon begins to wane, as in gets smaller, that's a time where we want to let go of any of this Gemini energy we may have picked up on that is not serving us. Okay, some of you know this about me already, is that for so many years now, I pull out my journal every single time we have a full moon, and I write down those things. I write down the growth I'm grateful for related to the sign the moon's transiting through, and write down what I want to let go of. Okay, now it's also important to understand, first of all, we are always experiencing all kinds of growth cycles, ones that are just specific to our own natal chart, some are as a collective. But on that, we also, anytime that we have a new moon or a full moon, again, of course, we experience it as a collective, but it's also very unique to each and every one of us. Okay. Now, if you get familiar with your natal chart, you can see which area of your life is being activated, not just by this full moon, by anything astrological. Okay. If you're a little bit familiar with your natal chart, look to see which house in your natal chart the sign of Gemini rules. Okay, it could be coming through your house of career, your house of relationships, your house of karma, your house of transformation, your house of money, all these different areas of your life that this could be coming through. And if you're using say Placidus or Coke or Regiomontanus, you're going to need to see where 4 degrees Gemini comes through your natal chart. Personally, I like working with the whole sign house system specifically for these moon transits. Okay, I use other house systems for different forms of astrology, but I find the most accuracy using the whole sign house system. Now, also, do you have anything in your natal chart near 4 degrees Gemini, or maybe trining it at 4 degrees Aquarius or Libra, or maybe opposing that at 4 degrees Sagittarius? There's a lot that could be said by getting familiar with our natal chart. Okay. Of course, if that's too much for you, that's perfectly okay. We just take a step back and focus on this Gemini energy until you're ready to move forward and get familiar with your natal chart. Of course, it's best to learn astrology in steps, like baby steps that you're most comfortable with. Okay. But if you get a reading with me, I always offer you a free video recording of the entire session where we pull up your chart, we go through all the houses, so that you can always go back to that recording and see which area of your life, again, is being activated by anything astrological. You can always schedule a web reading through erinwageastrology.com. Okay, so again, in this recording, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down this sign of Gemini for you so you know what you're working with here. I'm also going to pull up the chart and show you some other very interesting, kind of weird energies we've got going on for this full moon transit. And actually, I'm going to put this out there right now. We are experiencing a certain combination of aspects that can make it kind of easier to shift or like change fixed karma. For some people in their natal chart, especially if you've got Saturn in a fixed sign, okay, if you've got Saturn in Leo or Aquarius or Scorpio or Taurus, sometimes it's harder to change our karma, but there's a certain combination of aspects for this full moon that can, especially if we're writing this stuff down, can make it easier to shift some stuck karma. Okay, so there's that. I'm also going to be talking about certain parts of the body that are ruled by the sign of Gemini, because these parts of our body become more sensitive when the moon transits through the sign of Gemini, but especially when it's a full moon in Gemini. Okay, we're going to be putting a little bit of focus on our nervous systems. So of course, we'll also be talking about some potential herbal remedies to help support these parts of our body as we experience a lunar Gemini transit. Okay, I will also be talking about certain gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Gemini. I don't want anybody to feel like they are missing out on something if you don't have, one of these Gemini stones. Of course, I always leave a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon's transiting through in the description below. But again, I don't want anybody to feel sad if they don't have any of these gemstones. You work with what you've got, okay? Especially if you're a beginner and you're learning how to work with this stuff. Okay, so there's that. So this sign of Gemini, this is what we call the mutable air sign. Now, when I say mutable, what I'm talking about is adaptability. The sign of Gemini is very adaptable, especially because it's in the element of air. So we're talking about adaptable air. Okay, when I think of the sign of Gemini in its purest form, I think of something like whimsical. It's kind of just fascinated by everything, that kind of energy. And by the way, I'm not by any means suggesting that everybody who is a Gemini is going to be super adaptable and whimsical, because there's so much more to the natal chart. But again, if we're talking about just Gemini energy in and of itself, it's ruled by Mercury. Okay, now Mercury is such a fascinating character, such an interesting energy to understand. In Greek mythology, Mercury is Hermes. Okay, in Norse mythology, Mercury is Odin. In Egyptian mythology, Mercury is Thoth. Okay, now all of these archetypes are kind of like the messenger of the gods, especially Hermes Trismegistus, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, is the messenger of the gods. Okay, and with that said, this mercurial energy, it really is kind of the messenger of the gods. It's like we're constantly receiving information, no matter what we're doing. If we're walking through a store, driving a car, reading a book, whatever it is, our conscious awareness, it's like wheels are spinning. There's always stuff going on. And it's basically Mercury's job. That's how we receive the information. Okay, so Mercury takes that information in. It's got to store it somewhere into our consciousness. And then when we want to bring that information back out to communicate it to somebody, that's also Mercury's job. And that's Mercury's job in this sign of Gemini. Gemini is really the sign of communication, being the messenger. Okay, and that's in part why Mercury has such a huge influence on our nervous system, and the sign of Gemini also, and Sagittarius, where the sun is, has a lot to do with our nervous system. Okay, because we're receiving that information and then putting it back out. Okay, so there's that. Now also the sign of Gemini represented by the twins. Okay, the twins, this has a lot to do with duality, can also have a lot to do not just with twins, but siblings. The sign of Gemini can have a lot to do with siblings. Okay, but this duality that comes through. I mean, Gemini even rules the hands. If you've ever noticed, I talk with my hands. This is a little side note for some of you who are studying astrology. All I have in my natal chart in the sign of Gemini is Jupiter. However, I'm a Sagittarius rising. Okay. Now, what rules Sagittarius is Jupiter. So whatever zodiac sign my Jupiter falls into means I'm going to have a lot of those characteristics of that zodiac sign. So another example, if you're, say, a Libra rising, then Venus is kind of your ruler. She's the captain of your ship. Whatever sign your Venus is in, you're going to carry a lot of those particular traits of that zodiac sign. So even though all I've got is Jupiter and Gemini, I'm quite Geminian and I do talk with my hands, but that's that duality that goes on. Okay. And if somebody's got, say, like the shadow side of Gemini going on, there can actually be a potential for two-faced, like being two-faced. Okay. So again, this moon, if that's something that you've been experiencing, unintentionally being a little two-faced or something like that, this would be an excellent time as soon as this moon gets to wane to let go of some of that. But overall, the sign of Gemini is very fun. It's such a great energy. Again, like using that word whimsical, this sign can be very popular. Gemini people can be like the kind of person that just goes around and socializes with everybody. It's a very sociable and versatile energy. Okay, now let's see here. Did we cover that? We got the ruler in, we got the mutable air energy, we got the twins, I think I got everything I needed to talk about there. Maybe something might come to me later, but overall, this sign of Gemini is a really great energy for sharing information, kind of networking, making connections, being sociable, going out, sharing the message, sharing information that you are aware of. Another thing about this sign of Gemini is it pays attention to the facts. Okay, that's another thing I wanted to mention. The motto for the sign of Gemini is I think. It's a highly, highly intellectual energy. When I say it wants to pay attention to the facts, okay, we can think about it this way. Here's Gemini over here in the zodiac. Here's Sagittarius over here. They're opposite each other. Now, Sagittarius is a faith-based energy that's looking at the big whole picture, like this sign of expansion and very faith-based. While Gemini, being the opposite of Sagittarius, zones in on the facts. It's like the forever student. The sign of Gemini, again, highly intellectual energy, who's always got their wheels spinning, always ready to learn. So when you think about this, how have you grown in these ways? How's your communication skills? Maybe you've been trying to share a message. Maybe you've been trying to, make a certain post on social media or get a message out, through your website or whatever it is. Verbal communication. The sign can also be very strongly associated with things like journaling. For those of you who have not started your journal, which I totally get it. Some people are just not going to be somebody who uses a journal, and that's okay. That is okay. I just have had the greatest results by writing these things down. I feel like that's like rule number one for manifestation is writing things down. But where was I going with that? If you're not somebody who uses a journal, this would be a really good time to start doing it. But also just envisioning these things can also be very, very helpful. But okay, this sign of Gemini can also be very strongly associated with things like being a journalist or an author of a book. A lot of people who've got a strong Gemini energy or something going on in their third house, they can be really good authors or journalists or somebody who's just getting the message out there. So how have you grown in these ways? Not only that, but again, keep this in mind. This can also be associated with siblings. Okay. So again, how have you grown in these ways? And what do you want to let go of that you picked up on with this Gemini energy that is not serving you? Okay. So there's that. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull up the chart here so we can start going through some of this pretty wild stuff for this full moon. Okay, so first of all, for those of you who are new to my recordings, I work with geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we do is we put Earth right here in the middle of this thing. This is basically a snapshot of the tropical zodiac for this full moon. Okay, and I will mention this. First of all, here, let's start with the moon. Here's the moon right here, the symbol for the moon. And here is the symbol for the sign of Gemini, technically called the glyph, okay? And you can see, in fact, there's a little bit, if you're on a phone or something, it's hard to see. There's a slightly bigger version of that glyph up here where I'm circling my mouse. That's the twins, that's 2. That's the Roman numeral 2, okay? Now, if you take the time to look up this full moon chart based on your location, it might look a little different because if you're, say, over, on the East Coast, then the moon would probably be somewhere over here. If you're over in the UK, I think it would be somewhere over here. But it's still going to be, no matter where you are in the world, it's still going to be at 4 degrees and 51 minutes Gemini, okay, for all of us. Now, with that said, 4 degrees, this is really like the first, it's within the first 10 degrees of the sign of Gemini. So it's in the first decan. With that said, this is pretty pure Gemini energy. Okay. Now, once it gets past 10 degrees, it really starts to blend in with other zodiac signs, but this is pretty pure here, this sign of Gemini. Now, if you look across the chart here, exactly opposite the moon is the sun at 4 degrees and 51 minutes Sagittarius. Anytime we have a full moon, it means the sun and the moon are exactly opposite each other in the zodiac. That's in part why full moons are so powerful, because we've got the 2 brightest lights in the sky basically facing each other. They're about embracing the growth that we've all experienced, that sort of thing. Okay, and by the way, happy solar return season to all of you Sages out there. Happen to love that energy as well. Gemini and Sagittarius are fun energies. Sagittarius is the mutable fire sign. Let's talk about Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the mutable fire sign. So again, that mutable energy is super adaptable, and it's like, you know, where do I go next kind of energy. But in the element of fire, it's almost like wildfire. The sign of Sagittarius can be very optimistic, can be very fun people. Ruled by Jupiter, again, as I mentioned, the sign of Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is considered the great benefic, okay? And in fact, in Greek mythology, Jupiter is Zeus, okay? And can bring things like wisdom and abundance and luck, philosophy. Again, that sign of Sagittarius, it's like it's a faith-based energy, but it's also about kind of knowing, okay? It's, in fact, the motto for the sign of Sagittarius is I see. In fact, this energy sign of Sagittarius is the archer that's like out to seek things. It's always on an adventure, okay? Again, that doesn't mean just because somebody's a Sagittarius, they're always going to be on an adventure, because again, there's so much more to the natal chart. But this sign of Sagittarius in and of itself is a very excitable energy. Gemini and Sagittarius, both are excitable energies, okay? Now, what we've got right next to the sun, this has been going on for a little while. I think we got a couple more weeks of this. Mars is very close to the sun. What was it, like a week ago? We had a Mars cazimi, meaning Mars and the sun were in the exact same spot. And Mars is dominant, okay? Mars is the aggressor. Mars is sometimes referred to as the planet of war. And I don't mean to make Mars sound bad, because Mars is what makes us go do what we got to do, okay? Mars rules our muscles and our adrenal glands, okay? Mars is the energy that is like, let's go, we got to go to, in fact, if you look at the symbol for Mars, that little, it's a circle with the arrow coming out, Mars is like trying to penetrate, okay? That's Mars's job. And when we have, well, this is called a conjunction, okay? When two planets or any celestial points or celestial bodies are very close together, it's called a conjunction. And you can think of this as, like, I'm holding a flashlight that shoots the sun's rays out. The sun is our vital force, okay? It's our sense of identity. So if we've got the sun's energy right next to, I'm holding a flashlight that's projecting out Mars's energy, the closer that those flashlights are together, it looks just like one light, okay? They blend together and want to work as one. So this is very, very like go kind of energy, but it's in a mutable sign. So it's kind of like, I want to go here and I want to go there. There's a lot of kind of like rambunctious energy going on here. There are some things that kind of cool that down a little bit for sure. But overall, just based on the sun and Mars and the fact that it's a full moon, it's like, let's go do stuff, okay? And which is interesting as well, because now we're, for those of us in the the northern hemisphere, it's getting cold. And it's interesting. Sagittarius is an interesting energy because what it's doing is it's mutating the energy to bring us into winter. The mutable signs, they mutate the energy to bring us into a new season. We are now like at the end of fall. Okay, and that Sagittarius energy is like, okay, let's change the energy so we can prepare for Capricorn season will be next. Okay, so there's that. Now, again, think about this. Do you have anything in your natal chart near, like say between 0 and 8 degrees Sagittarius? Mars and the sun are sitting on that thing in your natal chart. They're activating it, especially, okay, so let's say if you've got Mercury between 0 and 8 degrees Sagittarius in your natal chart. Mercury, again, he's like the ruler of our mental function, basically. So you've got, you know, this go energy sitting on top of your Mercury, unless you've got something that would be counteracting that. Other than that, in your natal chart, that's like fiery. Let's go. I personally love it when Mars comes and sits on my sun. I love it. It gives me all the energy I need to go do what I got to do. Fantastic transit for most. Okay, now let's see. Now we'll talk about Mercury. Here's Mercury. So again, Mercury is a pretty big key player here because he's the ruler of the sign that the full moon is taking place in. And Mercury's also in Sagittarius, which I love this placement. I'll tell you why. Because I mean, there's a lot of, I love so many people. I can always look at the positive as a Sagittarius rising. I can always look at the positive side of placements and even all aspects, that sort of thing. But so with Mercury and Sagittarius, it's people's like neurons connect quickly. And they're okay, I'm gonna go learn this over here. I'm fascinated by that. I want to go over here. But all up in their mind, which can be very fun. It could be very optimistic energy, no doubt, but it also can be a little like Mercury is considered debilitated in the sign of Sagittarius because Mercury wants to be more organized and clear and concise. Sometimes he could just be going too fast and not know which direction to go in when he's in the sign of Sagittarius. But at the same time, it's a fun energy. Okay, so there's that. Now I kind of feel like we should talk about Venus. So here's Venus right here, who's going through the sign of Libra, which is absolutely wonderful. Venus is Libra's ruler. Okay. With that said, Venus is in her own home. She likes to be there. She's comfortable there. The sign of Libra is a sign of harmony and balance and relationships and, you know, everybody just kind of getting along, that sort of thing. So Venus loves to be there. However, what's going on is if you look very close to Venus, this right here is the South Node. Okay, the South Node is kind of like the drain point for celestial energy. Okay, the South Node is where things go out. Now, with that said, Venus's energy, she can't necessarily work exactly the way she wants to currently because she's approaching the South Node. I think it's actually 2 days, I believe it's on November 29th, 2 days after this, that Venus and the South Node will be exactly conjunct. Okay, now this is not necessarily a big deal for everybody. However, if you have something in your natal chart near, say, between 21 to 26, maybe even 27 degrees Libra, there could potentially be something that like has to be drained out of your life that's involving a Venus kind of energy. Okay, Venus is about beauty and romance and love and anything that's aesthetically pleasing, that sort of thing. There can be, I know a story of an artist, because Venus can have a lot to do with art as well, especially if it's beautiful art. And she was an artist, I think she was a docent, and she was on her way to go give a presentation on her art. And it was like a very big deal. And she was experiencing a transit like this, and she lost her art portfolio on the way to this thing. And it was like, oh gosh, how tragic. Some people might just feel like they're not feeling quite as beautiful with that kind of transit. Sometimes it might involve a relationship, a romantic partner, or also Venus doesn't necessarily only represent a romantic partner. Venus can also have a lot to do with any female in our life other than mother. The moon is more associated with mother, but Venus could be a sister, a best friend who's a female, that sort of thing. Okay, so there's that. Now, let's talk about Jupiter. Let's head on up here to Jupiter. Jupiter is going to the sign of Taurus. Now, we've talked about this. So Jupiter, there's wonderful things that can come from this. I mean, if you've got, Jupiter is in retrograde, which could be a little wacky, but if you've got something in your natal chart near 7 degrees Taurus. So again, I'm kind of using, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's perfectly okay. But for those of you who do know what I'm talking about, I kind of like to use a smaller orb, unless if I can see it in the chart and I know something's being activated. But I like to use a smaller orb for this sort of thing, especially if I'm speaking to a collective. But if you do have anything, say between 3, maybe even 2 degrees Taurus, all the way up to, let's go with 11 degrees Taurus, then Jupiter is sitting on that thing in your natal chart. And again, Jupiter, he's the great benefic. Jupiter brings luck and abundance and wisdom, philosophy, and all the wonderful things, okay? Again, he's in retrograde, so it's a little goofy, but at the same time, Jupiter can still be very charitable, okay? And this is, obviously, there's a lot of benefits that can come from that kind of transit, but I will say this as well. Jupiter also rules fat, okay? Oils, fat in the body, or, you know, oils that we eat, that sort of thing. And the sign of Taurus is very strongly associated with food, okay? In fact, it rules this part of the body where food goes in, taste buds, all sorts of things, okay? Now, with that said, there can be potential, if this is hitting something in your chart, to, again, Jupiter's the great expander, okay, to expand the waistline to an unhealthy degree. Of course, that's not going to happen for everybody, but if this is something that's going on for you in your life, you might want to, especially now that the holidays are approaching, we just had Thanksgiving and all sorts of things, might want to be a little bit careful, especially with things that are sweet and fatty, okay? And again, there's wonderful oils out there. There's great fats, you know, avocado has an excellent fat in it. You know, if you're getting, personally, if you're getting olive oil, I highly recommend getting a higher quality olive oil, because there's some really, you know, when we think of olive oil, we think of good fat, right? But at the same time, there's some really toxic, like if you're just buying like the generic brand from a store and it's not organic or that sort of thing, it actually might not be so great. But healthy oils are fantastic. And in fact, Jupiter can even help flush things out of our body if we're eating the right kinds of oils. Okay, so there's that. I hope I described that properly. All right, now Uranus up here and also in retrograde going to the sign of Taurus. So Uranus is the one who brings the abrupt changes, like what the heck is going on? Now, if you've got anything near 20 degrees Taurus in your chart, you've already been experiencing this for a long time. Uranus, let's see, it's been, geez, I want to say like 8 months or so that basically around this degree of 20 degrees Taurus, Uranus came up and activated that thing in your chart. And now he's retrograding and then he's got to go back and do it again. And Uranus can be great. What I love about Uranus is that Uranus is like a freedom fighter. Uranus is like out with the old ways of doing things, in with the new way of doing things. I do kind of feel like Taurus is also very strongly associated with money. And I kind of feel like there's going to be something that happens between now and maybe like late 2025 that involves a new way of money, a new way of spending money, and do, you know, and which there's definitely pros and cons to that. Absolutely, hands down, no doubt. But at the same time, it's like that Uranus, if we're smart about it, if we know what we're doing, which I don't claim to be necessarily smart with, you know, the technical stuff that's constantly changing, but if we can keep up with it, we can benefit from this as individuals if we're smart about it. Okay, so there's that. But overall, if you've got something near 20 degrees Taurus in your natal chart, you already know you're going through some big changes and they're abrupt, but it can turn out, this could be the kind of transit. Let's say your sun is near 20 degrees Taurus. It could have even started, you know, a couple of years ago, where all of a sudden, like everything is changing in my life. Like what is going on? My job, my girlfriend, my whatever it is, just like abruptly gone, whatever. And it can feel like almost very unnerving. But when this transit is complete, it can free you from something that you really didn't need or want in the first place at all. Maybe it's something you didn't even know that you didn't want. Uranus can free people of those sorts of things. Okay, so there's that. Let's talk about Saturn. Oh, this has to do with the karma I was talking about earlier. Okay, so Saturn is at 0 degrees and 59 minutes Pisces, basically 1 minute away from being at 1 degree Pisces. So Saturn, and he's in Pisces all the way until, I believe it's the end of February of 2026. Okay, Saturn creates limitations. In fact, I've heard from a few different teachers and read out of several different books that Saturn has a huge influence on what we could call our tit for tat karma. I mean, in my opinion, the whole darn chart, everything that's going on is karmic and fate and destiny and all sorts of things. But that, you know, what if you did something that was, you know, say harmful to somebody or something like that, Saturn's the one that's going to come back and bite you in the butt for it and make you have to, you know, experience something troublesome, because that's the karma. Now, with that said, so Saturn is going through the sign of Pisces. Pisces is, again, another mutable sign, adaptable sign. Saturn does struggle in the sign of Pisces. He's not debilitated, but he does, it's just not his favorite place to be, because Saturn likes to be cold and rigid and restrictive and taking care of responsibilities. And Pisces is like, my responsibilities are just spiritual responsibilities. Again, I'm not suggesting everybody's Pisces is like that, but that's the Pisces energy is very much like that. Okay, so what's going on here is with Saturn at these very, very, very early degrees of Pisces, it's working potently, okay? And there's a pretty darn strong aspect going on from Saturn over to Mars here, okay? This red line that's going from here to here, it's also squaring the sun. These red lines are called squares. They're approximately a 90-degree angle. And it's not necessarily considered like a great aspect to have Saturn square Mars, but at the same time, these are immutable signs, which can create that adaptability. The squares, I mean, really squares in and of themselves can create a force, like maybe an uncomfortable force or tension, but it can force things to happen, especially between Saturn and Mars, okay? And in these mutable signs, and Saturn having this influence over our tit for tat karma, we can shift that, we can change that karma, especially if we write these things down, okay, and do something about it. Now also, and what I mean by do something about it is we can't just change our karma just by writing things down. We have to act on it as well. Okay, now we've also got Saturn squaring the moon up here. It's a 4-degree orb, but still it's there. Okay, so that together here, this combination of these two squares going from the sun and Mars up to Saturn and Mars squaring the moon creates what we can call a T-square. Okay, this combination of aspects. We've got the full moon in a mutable sign. We've got sun and Mars conjunct in a mutable sign, and Saturn at 0 degrees Pisces, which is another mutable sign. We can work with this. This can be, again, those squares can force the change that we need. Okay, so there's that. Again, I always do try to find the optimistic stuff about these transits. Okay, now we'll just briefly touch on the North Node up here in the sign of Aries. So the North Node is in Aries all the way until January of 2025. Now the North Node, as I mentioned earlier, the South Node is what takes energy out. The North Node is what brings it in. The North Node is like a pump that brings celestial energy in, and it works aggressively in the sign of Aries. Aries is an aggressive energy. Again, I'm not by any means suggesting that people who are Aries are always going to be aggressive. They certainly can be. They can be very competitive people, Aries energy. Aries is ruled by Mars. Again, Mars is often referred to as the planet of war. So we've got the pump, like bringing in aggressive energy. And this is, especially if this is hitting something in your chart, and not only that, but there's a really strong trine going down to Mercury. For some people, this could be like really stimulate. Aries rules the top of the head. This could be very almost like pressure in the head or stimulation in the head, like overactive thinking, that sort of thing can be going on. Again, especially if you've got something near 24 degrees Aries in your chart. As a collective, I'm just going to be honest. This is with the North Node going through Aries and the South Node going through Libra, which again, to be clear here, Aries is the warrior. Okay, Libra is the sign of balance and justice. So we've got the pump in the sign that brings in the aggression, and the drain point going through the sign that's about justice and fairness. So there is some kind of, not so great things that can come from that, but on the same time, there can also be really good things that come from it. And I'm kind of speaking from the perspective as a collective here. Obviously there's some pretty ugly things that are going on in the world involving things like war. So in my opinion, I just wish I could get everybody on board, 75% of the world to all choose a certain time and date, especially if we align it astrologically, to meditate on peace. And I know I sound like a total hippie. I kind of am a total hippie, but I do feel like that's what we need to do at some point. And I don't have the powers to arrange something like that. But if, I'm always on board if somebody else feels like doing that. I'd like to join that sort of thing. Okay, now, and also I'm rambling because Mercury is literally sitting on my ascendant right now, and we're talking about a full moon in the sign of Gemini. So I apologize. Okay, now Chiron, the wounded healer. Okay, the Chiron, I don't want to go too deep here because I've talked about this so much. It's like basically Aries is the sign of self. Yes, it's an aggressive energy, but it is the sign of self. It's the first sign of the zodiac. And it has, again, it rules the top of the head, but being ruled by Mars also has a lot to do with our adrenals and our muscles, like the things that make us go do what we got to do. Okay. With Chiron, the wounded healer, going through the sign of self, let's actively, and it is in retrograde. I'll say that it is in retrograde. So it's again, a little tricky here, but it's still, Chiron's in Aries, I think all the way to early 2027. So this is such an opportunistic time to work on healing ourselves like a warrior. Like, let's do this. Let's do it. Let's get the muscles going. Let's get the adrenals going. Let's take care of our adrenals as well. Okay, let's see here. Pluto, no longer in retrograde, going through the sign of Capricorn. Again, this is one we've talked about for a while. So Pluto is, hallelujah, no longer in retrograde, because Pluto is very aggressive while in retrograde. But Pluto brings the very powerful transformation. Okay, that's Pluto's job, the bringer of aggressive, slow, painful transformation. But Pluto can also bring power. Okay, now, sign of Capricorn rules the structure of our civilization, even the cities, like the streets, the buildings, that sort of thing. The sign of Capricorn is like the most strongly associated with things like that. Government. Also, the sign of Capricorn rules traditions. Okay, I'm talking about things like holidays. And I have noticed since Pluto's been going through Capricorn, seems like fewer and fewer people are, celebrating traditions in the same way that we did 40 years ago. Pluto's been in Capricorn since 2008. Pluto will be completely done in Capricorn in December of, basically a year from now, in December of 2024. But he is going to peek into Aquarius. Let's see, I think that's in January of 2024. He's going to peek into Aquarius briefly and then retrograde back. That's a powerful transit because Pluto moves so slow. So when Pluto changes a zodiac sign, it is a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there for now. And what am I covering up here with my face? Neptune. Okay, so here's Neptune going through the sign of Pisces. This is another one we've talked about quite a bit. And I'm just realizing there's also a square going from Neptune to Mercury as well. Wow. Okay, so Neptune is the ruler of dreams and mysticism and spirituality and this kind of like breaking down the psychic boundaries, especially like it creates psychic porousness. I remember the first time I heard that specific terminology and be like, what does that mean? Psychic porousness. I mean, kind of just putting the puzzle pieces together. And I really do understand it now. I really do understand the psychic porousness and what Neptune does. It basically, again, it just breaks down our psychic boundaries. Neptune works very, very comfortably in the sign of Pisces because Neptune is one of Pisces' rulers. All those things that I just said about Neptune, we can apply those to Pisces as well. Pisces is the sign of dreams and mysticism and spirituality, and it's this very flowy energy, very mutable water energy. Okay, now this is a wonderful transit for spirituality. I believe Neptune's in Pisces all the way again till the end of 2025. At least it's at least another couple of years, year and a half, something like that. Okay, but with Neptune squaring Mercury, this can almost kind of, again, especially, do you have anything in your chart at 24 degrees? If you do, something's getting activated in your chart, like literally anything at 24 degrees, because we've got the nodes at 24 degrees. Venus is almost at 24 degrees. She's at 21 degrees. We've got Mercury at 24 degrees, and we've got Pisces at 24 degrees. If you've got anything in any zodiac sign, you're 24 degrees, it's getting hit by some of this stuff for sure. Okay, now, this could be a very, almost like going into like a deep meditation, going into like altered states of consciousness with Mercury squaring Neptune. It could be quite a mystical transit for some people, deeply, deeply spiritual transit for some people. But it's so important to keep in mind. Let's see, what do we got for Earth going on here? Oh yeah, we've got all that Taurus energy. Okay, it is important to keep in mind that, as I've mentioned so many times before, clearly I'm a very, by nature, spiritual person. I am a Pisces. I've got Neptune on my ascendant. I've always been that way. but it's also so, I'm so much more naturally and deeply connected to the spiritual side of life than I am the physical and mundane. I've had to train myself to work in the physical mundane. Okay. Responsibilities, bills, all the weird stuff. We have to, if we want to really fulfill greatness here, we kind of have to have a combination of both. Being a spiritual person and doing spiritual practices, for the most part, there can definitely be bad things, hands down. I understand. I say with confidence that there is such a thing as black magic, and that is not going to be good for anybody to be dabbling in, especially for your karma. But the lovely spiritual side of things, I think it's such a beautiful time to be embracing all that with Neptune going through Pisces. Not everybody gets to be alive while Neptune goes through Pisces. Neptune moves very, very slowly. So it's a wonderful time to be embracing those things, but I just try to encourage my clients and friends and family not to get too kind of lost in, forgetting about the fact that we are having this very physical experience. Okay, so I think I covered everything there. Now, let's talk about body parts. Okay, so the sign of Gemini, as I already mentioned some things, rules the hands, rules the arms, except for the elbows. The elbows actually fall under the category of the sign of Cancer. But Gemini also rules the lungs, okay, especially like the upper part of the lungs, okay? Now, with that said, these parts of our body become more sensitive, and it's, for some people, it's going to be more prominent than others. Some people who are very, very sensitive to all this stuff, they feel it. Some people won't even notice anything. And for some people, it could be something like, ouch, I hurt my hand or whatever. Like if you've got Mars near 4 degrees Gemini, where the moon is, Mars is heat, you burn your hand, something like that. Or for some people, if they've already got lung conditions, the lung conditions might become more sensitive. But it gone also the nervous system. So between Gemini and Sagittarius, we're talking about the afferent and the efferent nerves, meaning that when our skin gets touched by anything, the nerves that bring that information in and to like our spinal cord, okay, then those nerves got to go back out to the muscles. All of these things become more sensitive when we have a full moon in the sign of Gemini or a full moon in the sign of Sagittarius, because that means that Sagittarius and Gemini are both being activated. And for some people, especially people who've got like a lot of Gemini or Virgo in their natal chart, can deal with an overactive nervous system, but especially with this kind of transit. Now, I'm not a doctor. I don't claim to be a doctor, and I'm not offering any kind of medical advice whatsoever. But I do like to talk about things that I have learned just through all my wonderful teachers over the years. Some of you know I've been studying under Judith Hell for a very long time now. And in my opinion, she is hands down the most well-educated and experienced medical astrologer out there. And so I've learned a lot from her, and also just taking all kinds of nutrition classes and also the Mind Body Institute, studying under David Wolf. So I've learned how to take care of some things. And so what I wanted to bring up, first of all, milky oats or just oat tops can be excellent for the nervous system, can be great. It's just something so simple. I really like taking an oat straw tincture. These are from my friend Catherine, but I don't know if she's selling these on her website yet. I also like doing hops for the nervous system. Hops is great. It's almost, at least for myself, I think I notice more with the hops than I do with the oat straw. But I'm not somebody who deals with an overactive nervous system unless I'm going through something like moving, which is going on right now. So I have noticed like some things are just kind of like, ooh, a little anxious. And I notice more benefits, like kind of almost immediate results from hops than I do with the oat straw. But first, everybody's different. Everybody's different. Okay. So, and even just things like meditation can be great. Okay. For the lungs, I really like Mullein and also Elecampane. Work in 2 different ways. Excellent. Just you can look into this stuff yourself. I actually grow Mullein, and I've got a Mullein tincture going right now. And with the Elecampane, I always like to make an Elecampane tea. Some of you have heard me talk about this before in my mother's final days here. she had really very severe lung conditions. And I noticed when I would make the Elecampane tea and I made it really strong and I would just put it like through a tincture top. I forget what it's called. There's a name for these things, but I forget what it's called. I would just kind of squirt some of the very strong Elecampane tincture into under her tongue, and it helped. It definitely helped. I really have noticed that Elecampane is a great thing for lung conditions. But again, it depends on what the lung conditions are. There's so much more we could go into here, and I'm not going to make this video 8 hours long talking about lungs. But okay, and then hands, of course, just paying attention to your hands. I feel like there was another one I was going to mention here, and I apologize because it's not coming to my mind. But as I've mentioned, this is stuff you can do your research yourself. There's a really good book by Matthew Wood. It's called The Earthwise Repertory. Excellent book for learning about what herbs can be potentially good for conditions. Okay, so there's that. Now, gemstones. So the dedicated zodiacal birthstone for Gemini is agate. I've got a couple pieces of agate here. This is blue lace agate. I think this is probably my favorite type of agate. There's so many. This right here is moss agate right here, which is a beautiful stone. I love this one. Okay. Agate is one of my favorite stones. It's like a very affordable stone, but the reason that I love it is because it's calming. It's very like, especially the earth tone stuff. It's very soothing, can bring down inflammation, especially the blue lace agate, like I just showed here. You like, this doesn't got to be a big old piece like this. You just get a little tiny piece of blue lace agate, but can be good for the nervous system, soothing, again, especially the earth tones. But there's so many different styles and colors and forms of agate that you can go with. Okay, another one here. This is something called celestite, a beautiful stone. Oops, a little chunk is coming out there. Beautiful stone. Again, you don't need a big old honking piece like this. I just happen to have been collecting these for a long time. Really good for clarity, celestite. Really good for bringing mental clarity. Another one that I should have grabbed, I didn't get it, is citrine. Resonates very, very well with the sign of Gemini. All these things resonate very, very well with the sign of Gemini. Citrine could be kind of, I always think of citrine for finances, to increase finances, especially let's say you've got Gemini in your second house, your house of money. Put a little piece of citrine, on top of your journal. If you make out those journal entries, that's what I like to do. Okay, so there's that. I think I've covered everything. If you, again, you can always look in the description below for more extensive list of Gemini stones. And again, also, I want to mention this as well. I just want to repeat it, that if you don't have these gemstones, if you don't have any gemstones, it's perfectly okay. Maybe next time when we have a new moon, when you want to manifest what you want to bring growth in, you can manifest more gemstones into your life. But if not, I'm going to tell a story real quick here. Again, Mercury's sitting on my ascendant right now. When I was really just starting to get into this kind of stuff, and I'm not just talking about astrology, I'm talking about like working with trying to really understand things like Hermeticism, Hermes, okay? Understanding spirituality from all different directions. I really didn't have any gemstones. I had like some silly little crystals that I had, not silly, but some little crystals, like what you buy in a hippie shop as necklaces and that sort of thing. But there was a point where I ended up going on a hike. I live up in the mountains, so it was like kind of close to my house, and just finding really neat rocks. I still have them. They're sitting out on my front porch right now, like a sort of decor, I guess. And then started working with those. I'm writing in my journal, I am manifesting whatever it was. I am manifesting citrine into my life, whatever it is. And that's how I do have a lot of gemstones, but it's because and not like that, but I don't really ever buy them for myself. It's very, very rare. I've got family who knows how much I love these gemstones. I've got, a partner who knows how much I love these gemstones. So I do receive a lot of gemstones as gifts, and hallelujah for that. And thank you, family. Thank you, everybody, for that. But, you can manifest these things into your life as well, but don't feel sad if you don't have any. I was there once. Okay. So there's that. If you would like to schedule an astrology reading, please visit erinwageastrology.com. And also on that note, I put a link. If you want to buy a gift certificate for somebody, there's a link right on top on my website that it says gift certificate. You can click there. and get somebody a gift certificate if you so please. Okay, you guys, until next time, namaste to all of you.